Hello, friends. Henry James, a novelist, the brother of William James, had written many outstanding novels. So, one of his best novel, in my opinion, the name of which is The Portrait of Lady by Henry James, the brother of William James, the famous William James. So the portrait of lady starts with Isabel Archer is a woman in her early 20s who comes from a gentle family in Albany, New York in the late 1860s. Her mother died when she was a young girl, and her father raised her in haphazard manner, allowing her to educate herself and encouraging her independence. As a result, the adult Isabel is widely read, imaginative, confident in her own mind, slightly narcissistic. She has the reputation in Albany for being a formidable intellect, and as a result, she often seems intimidating to men. She has had a few suitors, but one of them is Caspar Goodwood, the powerful, charismatic son of a wealthy Boston mill owner. Isabel is drawn to Caspar, but her commitment to her independence make her fear him as well, for she feels then that to marry him would be to sacrifice her freedom. Shortly after Isabel's father dies, she receives a visit from her indomitable aunt, Mrs. Touchett, an American who lives in Europe. Mrs. Touchett offered to take Isabel on a trip to Europe, and Isabel eagerly agrees, telling Caspar that she cannot tell him whether she wishes to marry him until she has at least a year to travel in Europe with her aunt. Isabel and Mrs. Touchett leave for England, where Mrs. Touchett's estranged husband is a powerful banker. Isabel makes a strong impression on everyone at Mr. Touchett's country manor of Garden Court. Her cousin Ralph, slowly dying of a lung disorder, becomes deeply devoted to her. And the Touchett's aristocratic neighbor, Lord Warburton, falls in love with her. Warburton proposes, but Isabel's decline. Though she fears that she's passing up a great social opportunity by not marrying Warburton, she still believed that marriage would damage her treasured independence. As a result, she pledges to accomplish something wonderful with her life, something that will justify her decision to reject Warburton. Isabel Friend, Henrietta Stackpole, an American journalist, believes that Europe is changing Isabel, slowly eroding her American values and replacing them with romantic idealism. Henrietta comes to Garden Court and secretly arranges for Caspar Goodwood to meet Isabel in London. Goodwood again presses Isabel to marry him. This time, she tells him she needs at least 2 years before she can answer him, and she promises him nothing. She is thrilled to have exercised her independence so forcefully. Mr. Touchett's health declined, and Ralph convinces him that when he dies, he should leave half his wealth to Isabel. This will protect her independence and ensure that she will never have to marry for money. Mr. Touchett agrees shortly before he dies. Isabel is left with a large fortune for the first time in her life. Her inheritance piques the interest of Madame Merrill. Mrs. Touchett, polished, elegant friend, Madame Merrill, begins to lavish attention on Isabel, and the two women became close friends. Isabel travels to Florence with Mrs. Touchett and Madame Merrill, Merrill introduced Isabel to a man named Gilbert Osmond, a man of no social standing or wealth, but whom Merrill described as one of the finest gentlemen in Europe. Wholly devoted to art and aesthetics, Osmond's daughter Pansy is being brought up in a convent. His wife is dead. In secret, Osmond and Merrill have a mysterious relationship. Merrill is attempting to manipulate Isabel into marrying Osmond so that he will have access to her fortune. Osmond is pleased to marry Isabel, but not only for her money, but also because she makes a fine addition to his collection of art objects. Everyone in Isabel world disapproved of Osmond's, especially Ralph, but Isabel chooses to marry him away. She has a child the year after they are married, but the boy dies 6 months after he is born. 3 years into their marriage, Isabel and Osmond have come to despise one another. They live with a Pansy in Palazzo in Rome, where Osmond treats Isabel as a barely member of the family to him. She is a social hostess and a source of wealth, and he is annoyed by her independence and her insistence on her having her own opinion. Isabel chafes against Osmond's arrogance, his selflessness, and his sinister desire to crush her individuality, but she does not consider leaving him. For all her commitment to her independence, Isabel is also committed to her social duty. When she married Osmond, she did so with the intention of transforming herself into a good wife. A young American art collector who lives in Paris, Edward Rosier, comes to Rome and falls in love with Pansy. Pansy returns his feeling, but Osmond is insistent that Pansy should marry a nobleman, and he says that Rosier is neither rich nor high-born enough. Matters grow complicated when Lord Warburton arrives in the scene and begins to court Pansy. Warburton is still in love with Isabel and wants to marry Pansy solely to get closer to her. But Osmond desperately wants to see Pansy married to Warburton. Isabel is torn about whether to fulfill her duty to her husband and help him arrange the match between the Warburton and Pansy, or to fulfill the impulse of her conscience and discourage Warburton while helping Pansy find a way to marry Rosier. At a ball one night, Isabel shows Warburton the dejected-looking Rosier and explains that this is the man who is in love with Pansy. Guiltily, Warburton admits that he is not in love with Pansy. He quietly arranged to leave Rome. Osmond is furious with Isabel, convinced that she is plotting intentionally to humiliate him. Madame Merrill is also furious with her, confronting her with shocking impropriety and demanding brazenly to know what she had to do to Warburton. Isabel has realized there is something mysterious about Madame Merrill's relationship with her husband. Now she suddenly realized that Merrill is his lover. At this time, Ralph is rapidly deteriorating, and Isabel receives word that he is dying. She longs to travel to England to be with him, but Osmond forbids it. Now Isabel must struggle to decide whether to obey his command and to remain true to her marriage vows, or to disregard him and hurry to her cousin's bedside, encouraging her to go. Osmond's sister, the Countess Jiminy, tells her that there is still more to Merrill and Osmond's relationship. Merrill is Pansy's mother. Pansy is born out of wedlock. Osmond's wife died at about the same time, so Merrill and Osmond spread the story that she died in childbirth. Pansy is placed in a convent to be raised, and she does not know that Merrill is her real mother. Isabel is shocked and disgusted by her husband's atrocious behavior. She even feels sorry for Merrill for falling under his spell, so she decides to follow her heart and travel to England. After Rolf's death, Isabel struggled to decide whether to return to her husband or not. She promised Pansy that she would return to Rome, and her commitment to social superiority impels her to go back and honor her marriage. But her independent spirit urged her to flee from Osman and find happiness elsewhere. Caspar Goodwood appears at the funeral, and afterward he asks Isabel to run away with him and forget about her husband. The next day, unable to find her, Goodwood asks Henrietta where she has gone. Henrietta quietly tells him that Isabel has returned to Rome, unable to break away from her marriage to Gilbert Osman. So this is the story, a beautiful story of the Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. And beautiful, very beautiful. And let us see how many characters involved in this novel. So there are many characters, as I told you, like Isabel, the main protagonist or the heroine of this novel, and many other characters very beautifully. So this novel is about the beautiful soul of Isabel, how she is devoted to her husband, to her marital obligation, and beside many temptations, she did not move and to be unfaithful to her husband. This is the story of The Portrait of the Lady by Henry James. Thank you very much for patient listening.